All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute mountain of evidence that recently sent shockwaves across the globe, the Epstein files. We're going to take a really focused, totally objective look at these documents. We're not just doing this to understand one man's crimes, but to actually examine this sprawling global architecture of unchecked power, and crucially, why it matters to all of us. Let's dive in. Okay, here are the concentric circles of complicity we'll be examining today. 1. The unlikely rise. 2. A currency of compromise. 3. The Epstein files revealed. 4. The complicit elite. And 5. A system working as intended. So, kicking things off with Section 1, the unlikely rise, building the foundation. To truly grasp the scale of this whole thing, you have to look at where it started. Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout and a math teacher. Yet, somehow, almost out of thin air, he acquired the largest private residence in Manhattan. We're talking about a massive 7-story, 40-room luxury mansion. And the official transaction price on paper from billionaire Leslie Wexner, exactly $0. No money exchanged hands. It essentially became this fortress of intimidation, complete with taxidermy tigers and a first edition of the novel Lolita. Inside that house, absolute control was the law of the land. The documents reveal that his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, actually designed a 58-page rule book for the house staff. And these rules were deeply, deeply degrading. They included strict, written orders that staff were never allowed to make eye contact with Epstein. Think about that. This wasn't about privacy, it was purely an exercise in total domination and psychological conditioning. Moving on to Section 2, a currency of compromise, the business model. Let's look at how this intense need for control built his core operation. This methodology ran on a seriously grim blueprint. First, gain the trust of vulnerable individuals. Then, initiate a horrifying grooming process led by Maxwell to completely normalize the environment. Next was the exploitation itself. But the final, absolute most crucial step, client leverage. Epstein quite literally used victims as currency. He provided them to powerful clients to bind those elites to him through shared complicity and devastating leverage. It's like a web, right? To maintain this network, they turned to what is essentially a chilling, localized pyramid scheme. The documents show how they targeted local high schools in places like Palm Beach. Young girls were offered $300 for what was framed as massages. But to keep the machine fed, they threw in a $200 cash bonus for every single friend a girl referred. This effectively and tragically turned vulnerable teenagers into recruiters for their own exploitation. And remember, the overarching goal of all of this was surveillance and leverage. Victim Maria Farmer provided this terrifying description of a media room inside the Manhattan mansion. It was just this massive wall of surveillance monitors connected to cameras hidden inside everyday objects like soap boxes and tissue dispensers. According to Farmer, the screens just showed, quote, toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. When the FBI eventually raided his properties, they found locked safes full of meticulously labeled CDs. And these CDs featured the names of underage victims right alongside the names of incredibly powerful guests. That was the whole point. Which brings us to Section 3, the Epstein files revealed, the data dump. Now, for years, the public only had rumors, right? Well, that changed with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. We are talking about the forced release of over 3 million pages of documents straight into the public domain. 3 million. Investigators and journalists are actively sifting through decades of emails, flight logs, and banking records as we speak. It's a literal mountain of hard evidence proving what so many had suspected for years. To put the sheer scale of the digital footprint into perspective, during their raids, the FBI seized a mind-boggling 14.6 terabytes of obscene and illegal material from his various properties. 14.6 terabytes. That is enough data to fill entire server racks. This wasn't some small, localized crime ring. This was a fully industrialized operation. And as investigators combed through the emails, they found something incredibly disturbing. This bizarre, coded language flying back and forth between global elites. You have multi-billionaires obsessing over needing pizza and grape soda, with these giggling little notes saying no one else can understand. You have hundreds of references to sending girls to the dentist and logistical complaints about managing frozen white tuna. They were hiding human trafficking logistics right there, in plain sight. Section 4. The complicit elite, expanding the circle. The sheer breadth of the individuals caught in this web is just staggering. I mean, it wasn't confined to any one industry. You have major tech billionaires, renowned scientists holding TED Talks, and literal members of the British royal family. And politically, the complicity is completely impartial. The flight logs feature prominent figures from all sides of the aisle. We're talking everyone from Bill Clinton and Barack Obama's White House counsel to Donald Trump and his political strategist Steve Bannon. It is a completely bipartisan, multinational alignment of power. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between what these elites said publicly and what the files prove they did privately. Take Elon Musk, for example. Publicly, he stated he had zero correspondence with Epstein and refused all invitations. But the unsealed emails show Musk writing to Epstein, asking which night on the island would have the wildest party, and explicitly requesting the opposite of a peaceful island experience. Or consider Howard Lutnick, the current U.S. Secretary of Commerce. He told the press he aggressively cut ties with Epstein way back in 2005, after being disgusted by a tour of his mansion. Yet, the newly unsealed files show that 7 years later, in 2012, Lutnick was vacationing on Epstein's island with his family and signing multi-million-dollar business contracts directly with him. It just doesn't add up. But it wasn't just individuals. Major financial institutions were completely complicit too. JP Morgan Chase processed over $1 billion in transactions for Epstein. Over $1 billion. Despite internal warnings and glaring red flags regarding large cash withdrawals and obvious human trafficking indicators, bank executives actively overrode the objections to keep him as a highly lucrative client for over a decade. Eventually, the bank had to settle a lawsuit from victims for $290 million. Finally, Section 5, a system working as intended. We absolutely have to look at the deeply entrenched systemic failures that allowed this to happen out in the open for decades. If you track the timeline of impunity, you see a justice system bending completely backwards. Police investigated him thoroughly in 2005, yet he received this unprecedented sweetheart deal in 2008, granting federal immunity. It took until 2019 for a proper arrest, which, as we know, abruptly ended with his highly suspicious death in custody just weeks later. To understand how absolutely broken that 2008 punishment really was, consider this detail. During his supposed incarceration, Epstein was granted a work release program. This allowed a convicted trafficker to literally walk out of the county jail for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, just to go back to his office and continue operating his global enterprise, entirely unchecked by the authorities. Unbelievable, right? The files also reveal these undeniable connections to foreign intelligence and global diplomacy. We see emails showing a UK cabinet minister illegally leaking classified government economic policies directly to Epstein. We see former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak meeting with Epstein dozens of times, using him for shadow diplomacy and venture capital funding. Epstein was operating at the absolute nexus of money, state secrets, and global power. And all that wealth entirely insulated his most disturbing, godlike ambitions. Documents detail his obsession with transhumanism at his massive Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. He actually consulted top scientists about a plan to impregnate up to 20 women at a time in order to mass spread his own DNA. It really showcases a terrifying reality where infinite money and a total lack of boundaries breed just unimaginable hubris. So the crucial takeaway here is this. These 3 million pages of evidence don't just expose one monstrous man. No, they expose a system that functioned exactly as it was designed to. It protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. It proves without a doubt that there is an entirely separate set of rules, laws, and consequences for the global elite. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. If we now have millions of pages proving undeniably that a dual justice system exists, one for the incredibly wealthy and one for everyone else, can true accountability ever actually be reached? It's a heavy question, but one these files force us to deeply consider. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.